The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls podcast. We have another fantastic guest for you today, but before we jump into our conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and also LightFair. You've heard us talk about this a whole bunch of times. LightFair is back, beginning of May. Be there or be square.
And this episode is also financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got everything, including information on the new certification by NAILD, the Lighting Specialist in Controls. You should check it out if you're considering trying to get more skills in the lighting controls world, get more knowledge, get more experience. There's really great stuff going on with that certification, so check it out. Also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We could not do this without your support, MaxLight, with their revolutionary CMAX platform. Their lighting controls system really has a great way of upgrading existing lighting and lighting controls, or in brand new installations. It really has this awesome patented USB-C component to it that allows you to plug and play with lighting controls. So you don't have to pre-install the lighting controls. You can install the fixtures and then decide what you want to do with the lighting controls after the fact. It really kind of changes the game when it comes to lighting and lighting controls. Check them out, maxlight.com/cmax. It's a really great solution for a lot of projects out there, so really worth your time looking at it. But until then, let's get into the conversation here. So today we have Chris. Chris, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a senior product manager at NEEA, which is Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. And we do a lot of work in what we define market transformation world. So we're trying to change the world one light bulb at a time type of thing, with and one controller at a time, with doing stuff with utilities in the Northwest. We're funded by 150 some odd utilities in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And we do a lot of work with lighting controls right now. And me personally, I've been in the utility world business for about 25 years, maybe just a little bit longer. It makes me feel old every time somebody asks me that question. But so I've been doing it. I've worked for utilities. I've worked for for Bonneville Power. I've worked for a lot of different things. In the last 9 years, I've worked for NEEA. One of the things that we are very big into is Luminaire Level Lighting Controls. That's our big push when it comes to the controls world of lighting and everything that goes with it. So a lot of experience with the utility side of things and a lot of experience with controls and lights. So
awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. I mean, it's really a pleasure. You and I know each other, at least in passing, from various conferences and projects that we've been involved in. But I mean, regarding utility, I mean, having that level of experience from the utilities really gives you a unique perspective on this industry, because there are very few people who really understand what goes on in the world of utilities. And so do you mind just giving us a little background on what is the utilities involvement when it comes to lighting controls?
Yeah, so most utilities are into, whether it's lighting controls or lighting or HVAC or any of the the energy efficiency world. The reason they're doing it is literally for kWh, right? They're out there trying to make
Kilowatts
sure that
per
they're
hour.
saving. Yeah, so they're trying to save energy, right? And like, if you get an incentive, I mean, I think everybody that's probably listened to this show has delved into the incentive world at some point in time, right? Whether they got it for an A lamp, or they got it for a project, or they got it for a TLED, or they got it for controls, right? They get some sort of incentive in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a flat dollar amount or it's a price per kilowatt hour or whatever. But what the utilities are doing with that is they're buying that kWh, right? They're buying that power, and because most of them are regulated in some way, shape, or form as to having some sort of energy efficiency that they have to be able to prove, right? So
Mm-hmm.
take the state of Washington. They've got a law in the books that all the utilities, the electric utilities, are required to have a certain amount of energy efficiency every year. And if they don't get that energy, they get fined. They don't get that
Mm-hmm.
savings, so they go out and they have to get that. And that KWH is what they're buying with the incentive, right? So so the utility looks at that. And so one of the things with utilities is, if you look at a lot of their products and programs that they put out, is it has to be really well vetted that there's energy
Mm-hmm.
savings when
Yeah.
they do it, right? They don't do a
Right.
lot of stuff that's sort of iffy. They really need it to be real, because they have to be able to prove that it's real to the regulators
Mm-hmm.
or the state or the that kind of stuff. So they're very picky on the fact that it has to be real savings, right? They have to be able to count it and be able to count on it over time.
Right.
So-
And so what is involved in that vetting process?
It's a lot of making sure it works. So it's a lot of stuff we do, right? So NEEA does a
Mhm,
lot
right.
of field testing. Some stuff is not as hard to do field testing. Like, I mean, like an A lamp, when LEDs first came out, it's pretty easy. It's just a math equation, right?
Right.
If it was 60 watts and you go to 9 watts, then, and it's on for 1,000 hours, you know what it is. It's pretty easy. It gets more complex when you get into controls, or
Yeah.
even whole lighting systems, right? Because now it involves, what are you controlling? What are you asking the controls to do? And how are you asking them to do it, right? Is it
Mhm.
occupancy? Is it daylighting? Is it a little bit of both? How big are the zones? How little are the zones? How are you doing these things? So it makes a difference on how you design the system and what you're looking at, and what type of system it is, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's a network lighting controls that's got a single sensor controlling multiple fixtures, whether it's Luminaire Level that's got a sensor in every fixture that's controlling down to a really small set of zones, or how you design it. But then that becomes where it becomes more interesting on how you vet that, right? So it's a lot of field
Mhm,
testing,
right.
a lot of going out and seeing that it's installed, putting meters on it. When we first started doing Luminaire Level 10, 15 years ago, the first project we
Mhm.
did was with a fluorescent system. It wasn't even a Luminaire Level or
Right.
an LED system. It was fluorescent, right, with dimmable ballast. But the thing that kicks most, we saw that kicked controls up to a new level of accessibility was the LED, right? I mean, because now it is
Mhm.
actually controllable. You don't have
Right.
the same problems you had with fluorescence or with incandescence or with
Metal
halogens or any of
halides
the
or
other
something.
stuff, metal
Yeah.
halides and everything, right? You got all these
Right.
difficulty things you have to do to get them to actually control. But with LEDs, they're simple to control. So
Right.
it brought this whole new world of controls. And, so we spent a lot of time. We spent 9 years out there really going out and testing it and getting data and stuff to be able to prove that there is savings and what that savings typically looks like on average, right? And
Sure.
then, so that's a big thing, right? So that's a lot of what that goes into, and they have to do that for a lot of things, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
lights, whether it's HVAC, whether it's a motor, whether it's a refrigerator, whether it's all these things that they
Mhm.
offer incentives for. They want to make sure that they're real.
So we've seen, obviously, a lot of our listeners have probably, like you mentioned, have at one point in time filled out a rebate for lamps. That was super common until very recently, right?
Yeah.
They've swapped out fixtures, they swapped out lamps. We're now starting to see more utilities roll out controls incentives. So working along that vetting process, how does that work for the utilities? Is it sort of a flat fee? You have X number of sensors, X number of this, and they can define you're going to save on average this? Or is it, no, you end user need to give us a drawing and the proposed system so that we can look at the loads and the schedule and how the system is going to operate? Is every job truly unique, or is there a simple formula to it? It's not simple, but
Well, I was going to say, I wish there was a simple formula for it, but I think it's unique to each utility and how they look at stuff. But for the most part, if they can say that it's vetted, then they can call it deemed, right? So they can say, on average, most utilities look at it. Think of it as a bucket, right? Like if I take all the energy savings and I put it into a bucket, at the end of the year, if that bucket saved 25%, then that's what I'm going to give. Now, whether or not every job saved 25% doesn't overly matter to the utility, right? I mean, it matters,
Sure.
right? But they look at it like if at the end of the year the average is 25%, then they could have some that saved 50 and some that saved 10, or some that saved 25 and some that saved 35, and they're okay with that in looking at it when it comes to a sort of a deemed look and on how that looks. The ultimate thing and the optimal thing is if everybody saved exactly what you thought they were going to save, and everybody would be happy. In the world of controls, that's a tough thing, right? Because a single change can change exactly what happens, right? If you think about it, right? If you change the timeout time on your occupancy from 5 minutes to 7 minutes, that can change all the savings in there. And if nobody knows that it's happened because it's not something anybody sees or pays attention to, right? That can change how that looks over time. And that makes a difference. So when utilities tend to look at it, they look at it sort of on that average, right? They say, okay, we know that it's not going to be exact in a deemed situation, right? They're going to say, we're going to take, but we're going to figure this is the average of it. Now, they do have them where they do stuff that's more custom, right? And then that's where they sit down and they go, okay, we're going to put something on there, whether you're going to meter it or we're going to meter it, but we need to know the exact number of kWh that you saved, right? We need to know that in over whatever period of time, and we'll pay you for that number at the end of that, right? And that's a tough one on everybody. Utilities don't really want to do it. Customers don't really want to do it because it involves a lot more work on both sides. Right. Everybody, the utility has to remember that you've done it. The customer has to do it, and there's always the risk that something goes wrong and you don't get the savings, and then nobody's happy, right? So then at the end of that, so it kind of depends on what it is, but for the most part, when it comes to controls, especially in the Northwest where we're at, it's almost always done sort of by sensor or by fixture. You get this much per whatever you're doing, right? Whatever that dollar amount is. But we can see it. I've seen it done by square foot. I've seen it done by, a kWh. I've seen it done by, room size. A lot of different varieties. It depends. But for the most part, right now, it's like you get this for doing that, right? And so it's $1 for that. And they'll just average the savings when it comes over time.
And so from your experience, have you seen situations in which, the lighting controls did not meet the goal of the energy savings? And would you be able to tell us, what do you think caused that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always the risk, and we've definitely seen we've done field tests where they did not do what we thought we were going to get them to do, or what we thought the expectation was. Not pointing fingers at anybody,
sure,
but a lot of
no,
times,
of course not.
A lot of times it comes down to how it was installed or how it was programmed, right?
Sure.
I mean, that literally comes down. I mean, the equipment itself tends to not be. I mean, we all know the equipment works, right? I mean, an aux sensor is an aux sensor; it works. But if I put the aux sensor right next to a heat vent, going to have a problem with that sometimes, right?
Right.
And may not notice. Somebody may not know it. I mean, we had one that was installed, and it was a Luminaire level, and the fixture was right behind a hanging projector, and the heat vent from the projector blew right onto the aux sensor. I mean, you wouldn't think about it. It was a pendant mount fixture, and the sensor was literally 2 inches from where the heat was blowing out of the projector for the classroom, right?
And so, because you had passive infrared, it was seeing that air movement as movement and triggering
all the time, constant, right? And so, that made it a huge that caused problems, right?
Right.
And it took a long time to figure that out, because we were sitting there and going, oh, why in the world are we seeing this when we look at this? And then, then you look up and you're like, oh, yeah, well, that would be it. And an installer wouldn't necessarily know that, right? I mean, they should, but in reality, they're not going to do it. And if they're following what the plans were, and that particular piece wasn't written on the plans, then they're installing it exactly like they were told to install it, but it doesn't work. If you had taken the fixture and
And
literally flipped it around so the sensor was on the other side, would have been a totally different situation, right? No, we wouldn't have had that issue. So we've seen that. We've seen a lot, and programming can be it. A lot of times with sensors and almost anything that's a computer and you've got outputs is garbage in, garbage out, right? But so you have to be careful in what you put in and how you do it. I've seen some where they've taken them and the zone is one room, but somehow, some way, a fixture on the other side of the building was attached to that zone that was in there, and so nobody's in the room but the lights are on because a light, 100 feet away is active and somehow tied to that room, right? And so, it's with anything where you've got, where you're designing stuff and you're putting together, there's always unique things that come around. But I think one of the things that's nice about, especially lighting controls, is that if you pay attention to it, it's not hard to find where the problem is. You just have to pay attention to it. Right. So,
well, and I think that's a good rule of thumb. And I think, there's a lot of projects where there aren't a lot of people who are thinking about it, if anybody's thinking about it. And so, with this shift, right. And so with this shift from LEDs to controls, we're going to see many more projects that are implementing controls without a huge amount of oversight. And so, shifting the focus over to LLLC, Luminaire Level Lighting Controls, you're now increasing the number of devices that are on a project. And do you see that as a problem?
I think that, like, the first time you did it, it's a problem. Like the first time, if you were a contractor or you were doing it and it's the first time you've ever done it, I think it's I don't know, problem is a big word. Like, I think it's a learning experience for them, right? On how to do it. But once you've done it a couple times, I think it's actually easier, right? I mean, I think that in the end, because now every fixture has that. So you just install the fixtures, and now for the installer. And then when it comes to programming, you've got so many options of what you can do and what you can't do that you're just sitting there figuring out what the right thing to do is, right? One thing that I tell people is that, especially with Luminaire Level, is that data is king in our world right now, right? If you look at everything that's going on, data is the king. We don't know what to do with all the data that we have. But if you don't have the data, I know you're not going to figure out what to do with it. And to me, that's the big thing about Luminaire Level Lighting, is that I've got data that's coming in on, 8 foot on center data that's coming in for everything: occupancy, daylighting, temperature, space utilization, all this stuff. I may not know what to do with that data right now, but I'm going to figure out, if I have the data, what to use it for. And, and I can give an example of one of the things that we're doing right now that we're looking at, but that we wouldn't have thought of doing it that way if we didn't know we had that data and had it done that way, right? And so it's an important thing. And I think that once people get to, we've had many of experience where the installer was like, never done it before. And by the end of the project, they were like, well, this is so much easier than anything else. I just need, now I'm going to do this all the time because I don't have to think as hard, right? There's not as much thought process in it.
Yep.
Well, and I think that is one of the real perks to LLLC, is the fact that, because every single Luminaire has that control component, you're essentially creating a digital infrastructure for all the Luminaires, whether or not they're digital Luminaires on their own. And as a result, you're really able to have that individual controllability, unique programmability, and you can really tap into the system quite easily and seamlessly. So you have that troubleshooting built right in, as opposed to with older formats, you would have to, okay, where's the dimmer? Why is the dimmer not responding? Was it wired correctly? And so as a result, there is that benefit to contractors once they understand it. And so personally, I think there is going to be a rather steep increase in focus on LLLC and kind of skipping past NLC for a lot of people, which is an interesting scenario because, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think, and I've got my fingers crossed that's the case because we're really vested into the LLC thing
Sure.
and I'll say it as a reason, not because there's a monetary reason, but because we think that there's much greater energy savings that are capable with the LLC package than with any of the other controls package. And that's really the reason that we are so interested in it, is because of the savings capabilities that come with it. But I think that there's some components, we talk about, I talk to people all the time, and energy savings nowadays is probably the 10th on the list when they're trying to sell something. It's one of the last things they talk about, right? It's all the rest of the stuff. And so to me, it's like LLC sells all the non-energy benefit stuff that go with it. What you can do with it is what sells it, and the energy efficiency is what pays for it, or helps pay for it anyway, right? That's the key to it, right? That to me is the other stuff. And one of the things that I think gets lost because we don't think about it, because you're putting a brand new system in, so why would you change anything? But the flexibility of the system is impressive. We've got LLC in our office building, and we've increased the number of people to the point where we've got a big space, a room that was a private office that we have to we're putting a wall up to make 2 offices out of it. And if we didn't have LLC that was wireless, we would have about $10,000 worth of work from the electrician to make those lights work. Now what we have is 15 minutes of my time to unprogram the 2 wall switches and put 2 to one and 4 to another, and then that's the end of the lighting, and I don't have to do anything else with it. And that's a huge deal. I mean, if you think about it over time for spaces, and you couldn't do that with many other systems, right? I mean, that's just not a possibility. So I'm not big on the word future proofing, but it allows you to have flexibility as you go forward, right? And I think flexibility is worth a lot when it comes to these systems.
Yeah, I know that flexibility is huge. We've talked about it on the show a couple times. I've mentioned, we did LLLC here at our warehouse, and it's the same thing. We moved some mezzanine around a few weeks ago, and we dropped about 20 feet of mezzanine, and go into the app, reprogram the fixtures, take them out of this zone, put them into this zone, move the motion sensor, because the motion sensors are wireless. All is right with the world. 10 minutes, done. And it's amazing. Yeah. And you're going to start to see more and more of that, especially in flexible spaces. All right. So you'd mentioned that you've got all this data, and that you're starting to look at the data, and you're looking at some things that you wouldn't have done before. So you kind of hinted towards it, but never touched on it. So I'm very curious.
Sure.
What other things are you looking at with that data now?
Yeah, we're after the holy grail, right? Lighting and HVAC, the holy grail of controls. So the one thing that we've got is that I think there's something there, right? But what we've looked at, and most of the stuff that's been done has been done for very large buildings that have some sort of BS or BMS, EMS, or other BS type of system, right? Something that's controlling it. And when you do that, you have all this extra work, and it's a very costly, time-consuming, and difficult to make everything work together, right? So we've kind of taken a look at this and said, well, why don't we go to the other side of the world here and go to the simplest side? And if you look at the commercial office space or commercial building space in the United States, 60% of that space is controlled by single zone rooftop units, right? So all it is a thermostat on the wall. Mm-hmm. So we've decided that we're looking at this is, can we have the lights talk to the thermostat about occupancy, but not in a simplistic way of, is there somebody in the space or not in the space? But can we use occupancy data from the sensors as a proxy for people counting to give that sensor, to give the HVAC the ability to operate more efficiently based on the actual sort of numbers inside the space? So we've got a test project going on right now where we've got, we're using LLC, and in the basic gist of it, so it's got D4I in it, which is nice because the two-way communication is important when we look at this as we go through the digital world.
Just to stop, in case people are unfamiliar with D4I, it's a standard from Dolly that basically regulates how the driver is communicating out to a Dolly system.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, but it gives us two-way communication, which is the key to this, right?
Right.
So not 0 to 10 volt, which is a single, analog
Mm-hmm.
type of system, but two-way communication. So we've got these lights fixtures, and in the simplest form, let's say a space has 10 light fixtures, right? And we say, and it talks to a thermostat, and that's the HVAC zone. 8 of the 10 fixtures show active occupancy, where the thermostat can operate as if normal is there. And then the next level down is, say, 5 to 7 of the fixtures show occupancy. Well, that means the space is somewhere between 50 and 75% full, right? Maybe you don't need the thermostat to operate completely at the same temperature it did before. You could let it float a degree. You're not changing the thermostat. You're not touching you're just saying, hey, let the deadband go an extra degree, right?
Yep.
And then say, okay, the next one is from 2 to 4, let it go another degree. And then below 2 light fixtures showing occupancy, go to its full setback mode. So now you're using that to count, sort of understand where the people are in the space, and you're understanding whether that thermostat can handle it and move some temperature. In that, on paper, we think that that's somewhere between 7 and 15% HVAC savings.
Wow.
On top of what you get from the lighting controls. But the nice thing is literally at this point, because it's brand new and we're just working with somebody on it, there's like a router that's doing the translation from the lights to the thermostat. But we think that in talking to people, it wouldn't be hard to have the thermostat talk directly to the lighting system. If that's the case, and we get to that point, all you're doing is changing the thermostat out. And then on the LLC apps is you just have one more layer of controls. So you have a daylight zone, you have an occupancy zone, and then you have an HVAC zone. And it can all be programmed in the app, and so only the data that you're getting is occupancy data sent to the thermostat on a 15-minute average type of thing, right? Because HVAC's not instantaneous, so you don't need it to change immediately, right? So somebody walks through the space, you don't need to kick the HVAC system on for that, right? The lights need to turn on, but the HVAC system may not. But if they're hanging there, then you want it to do something. So we're looking at that, and we've got a project in that we're a pilot that we're doing with that, and we're hoping to have a few more of them here shortly. But very exciting, because it's not something, if we didn't have the occupancy data from all those, from all the lights, we would have never been able to get to that point. If we had an NLC system that had a single occupancy sensor in the zone, it wouldn't have made any difference. It would have been the same as what we have, which is somebody there or not there, and that's all we've got. So that's kind of what we're doing. So it's places we're learning to use the data from, and what that looks like, and how we can use it, and how we can better the whole building as a system, right?
Well, and I think that's a really, I love that project example, because there's so many people who are basically like, why do you need that many sensors? Like, what are you going to do? Like, it's just triggering on-off response. And so it's like, with that data, you can do a lot of interesting stuff like this that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. And so hopefully we are going to see projects that have LLC as a platform really leveraging that data going forward, and because it's already there, okay, may as well take advantage of it. And in this case, you're saying you just swap out one device. You're not actually making this huge integration that you have to do, like with a building automation system. It's literally a point-to-point integration. And so as a result, you have not really increased the cost of the project, but you've decreased the overhead of the project. So, that's a real perfect example of this sort of approach, and the kind of puts a lot of emphasis on this argument, why LLC. And it's more of just like, if you can't see it, that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that you haven't found it yet. And I think, there are a lot of people who make the argument that it's an argument looking for, or an answer looking for an argument or something like that. And it's like, I guess you could say that, but at the same time, there's a whole host of benefits that you can already see with LLC. And so, what do you think the real barrier is for widespread adoption of LLC?
I think there's a couple. I think people still have this idea that the cost is a barrier. We've seen huge costs, decreases over the time that we've done it. And now it's not overly, and especially if there's utility incentives, typically it's almost a wash at this point between any control system and an LLC system. But I think that there's some barriers on whether, like you said, whether we need that. Do we need that sensor everywhere? Do we need this stuff? There's a barrier on what's the benefit to me type of thing. And I think that's one of the things that we work on, quite regularly, is how do we show what those benefits are and why you should be doing it, and what the benefit to you is, not just the moment you install it, but what the benefit is 5 years down the road for you, right? And I think one of the other places, like utilities and people are going to have to look at is, we've always, in the lighting world, all incentives have been widget based, right? That's just what they have been, right? Like, I get this much for a lamp, or I get this much for a tube, or I get this much for a fixture. It's all widget based. With LLC, the difference is it's not a widget anymore. It's a system. You can't have the lights without the controls, and you can't have the controls without the lights. It's holistic. So now, when you look at that, now it becomes even better. I mean, because now you're setting yourself up to have even more savings because you've got both of those pieces. I relate it back to, lately I've been relating it back to, for those that have been in the lighting business for a while, high performance T8s. If you remember going back to that, right? And you had T8s, and you could change a T8 and put any ballast you want in, and you'd have some savings from the T8, from the T12, right? But there was a big push that if you used the right ballast with the right tubes, you got even more energy savings than if you did them separately. Well, it's the same thing, right? With this, is that if you do lighting with LLC, you're going to get even more savings than you would have if you tried to do things separately. And everybody kind of has to start, getting this idea that that's the way you want to look at this, because widgets, we've squeezed all we can. I mean, I know, everybody, DLC and all these guys are gonna, and even the government are pushing on lumens per watt. But realistically, we've skinned that bone down, right? There's not much left in that. Even if we squeeze it real hard, we're talking pennies on the dollar of what the energy savings is. It's that 80-20 rule, right? I mean, we're at that 20%, we're the last 20%, and it's going to be super expensive to save 20, that last little bit. And it's just not much, there might not be enough there to really, hang your hat on it. But if I could give you 65% because you put lights in, the controls in at the same time, on top of what you've saved with standard lumens per watt, I mean, that there becomes the selling feature for it. But you have to look at it holistically, and you have to look at it as a system. And I think that's the difference between past and present, right, and future, right? And in the past, everything's been widget based. Why do you do this? Because it's there. But we need to start looking at it as a system. And honestly, we need to look at the whole building as a system as we move forward, not just the lights, but I mean, everything. And that's part of working with the, the HVAC and all this other stuff, and having everything work together is where we're going to see the biggest amount of savings as we move forward, for the buildings, especially commercial.
So you mentioned, unfortunately, the past, and we do have a lot of people who still like to live there. So what is your answer? We get a lot of, and no offense to any electrician out there, right? But there are plenty of electricians who want to run wire, and that's what they want to do. And they want the control system, and they want to have it wired. And then we have other people who are afraid of wireless technology in their buildings. And you've done extensive testing and research. So what is your answer to some of those questions to help with that adoption?
Well, I think that's it's one of those cost things, right? So, like, a lot of times, this is where I find it humorous when people say LLC is more expensive, especially the wireless versions of it, right? Are more expensive than the non-wired ones. But what they don't do is they don't usually count for the actual wire in there, right? Things like, this is the fixture, this is the product, and this is the time it takes me. But then they ignore the wire that they had to run and pay for. And if you add all that in, that's where things start to become much more even, right? But as a contractor, it makes me giggle sometimes, because it's like, I don't understand. I mean, you want to run wire, but if you're getting the same amount of money and you don't have to run the wire, why would you want to run the wire? That's just more work for your part, but you're you're getting the same
Right.
amount with these other things. You just don't have to do the wire piece of it anymore, right? But I think a lot of it is it's a fear-based thing from a lot of people that callbacks. Callbacks are a big fear.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to go back on a job that they did because that doesn't make them any money. They lose money on it if they have to keep going back because there's a problem, and they have a fear of that when it comes to a lot of these wireless things. But wireless technology has come a long, long way. I mean, between Bluetooth NLC, between Zigbee, between all the different wireless components, even Wi-Fi. I mean, it's so easy right now to set these things up that it's crazy that they wouldn't be like, yeah, this is nice. This is what we're doing. And I think it's a change in the guard a little bit. Like I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, there was a study that came out that said the average electrician's age in Boston was 60 years old.
Wow.
Well, so there's an issue right there, right? I mean,
Yep.
I
Yep.
know, we all have phones, but we all know that usually it's a bit on the younger side that they're going to use all the technology that arrives with that, right? So I think we'll see the changing of the guard, so to speak, as we get more and more electricians that are adept at the doing the wireless stuff and working with whether it's an app or a phone or that kind of thing. But everything in the world is going there right now.
Mhm.
And we aren't going to be able to we can hold off for a while longer, but you're not going to really be able to. You're going to have to, either ride the wave of change or get crushed by it, one of the two. So
Right. Well, and going back to something you said, regarding a building being treated as a system,
Mm.
what is that? How does that transition look to getting to that point? Because there are still a lot of approaches to buildings where it's like these silos
Yeah.
and they're
it
not
is,
really
yeah.
connected or they're not coordinated at all. So, we still the issue of the projector, for instance, that's a perfect example of not thinking of a building as a system, but rather thinking of each silo as its own entity.
Yeah.
And so where do you think how can we overcome that challenge?
It's a tough one, right? I mean, because we've never had to do it, but I think there's a few
Mhm.
things out there that sort of help us along the way, and utilities can help with that, right? As they start to look at this, because a lot of their widget based incentives are going to go away.
Hmm.
We're starting to see it in the Northeast,
Mhm.
right? They're going to
Right. Yep.
stop paying for LED lamps and fixtures
Right.
because there's nothing else, right? You're not going to go out and get something different, so they're just not going to pay for it anymore. So for them, if they want to have a lighting program, they either have to have a controls program or they have to have some sort of program that is like a holistic program for a building, right? And so utilities can
Mhm.
help with that and start, looking at that and going, we need to figure out how to um, look at these as a system rather than widgets, and how we can encourage people to look at it as a system, and how we can encourage them to do the systems that make the building more efficient, because that's where the money is going to be for the energy efficiency, right? But I also think there's some of the federal governments is well, I'll say could be, I don't know where we are going forward type of thing, but
There have been
um,
incentives by the federal government for this.
yeah.
Hmm.
So, but I think that one of the things that we look at as we go forward is that um, we need everybody to sort of decide that if electrification is what's going to be the future, or if carbon is a big deal, or if whatever, come up with another metric that's different that nobody uses, and that's not kWh or kW anymore, whatever those are. If that's what's going to be important as we move forward, then the way the government works, the way that the utilities work, the way that everybody works has to have a little bit of a mind shift on how they look at things, right? And I've said it,
Mhm.
and I'm sure I think you've probably heard me say it. KWH is important. It absolutely is. But KW is becoming more important. And
Right.
that's about when the power is used not so much how much power is used, right? When that power is used is becoming as important or more important than how much of it is because of renewable energy and everything that's out there, right? And so those things are what is going to define if knowing when the power is used and how the power is used, that's going to define how the system is used. And that's why you need the systems to start working together. In big buildings, maybe it's easier because you've got the BMSs or the EMSs, right? But in smaller buildings, that's going to be a challenge unless you start looking at everything sort of that in a package look. How do we get things talking to each other? I think the biggest battle is who's going to be the one that wins being the first one in, right? Is it the HVAC contractor, or is it going to be the lighting contractor? Who's going to be the winner of that cage match of who gets to be the leader and who gets to be the follower, right? And for me, it seems like the lighting side should easily be the leader because we're everywhere in a building. We've got the real estate, we've got the power, we've got the location, we got all the stuff that goes with it. But for some reason, we seem to battle and fight and not want to take advantage of what we have as an industry already in place to be able to it's not necessarily take over the world, but it's at least lead the world in the right direction when it comes to energy efficiency and how the building operates.
Right. And I feel like several colleagues of mine are prodding me to mention this is that, it's like we don't have the boots on the ground to support that. HVAC, on the other hand, they have skilled low voltage contractors who know what they're doing when it comes to intelligent control systems. Yeah, HVAC control systems might be a little bit simpler in some regards, especially in these smaller projects. But at the same time, they have that experience and knowledge that a lot of the people who get the scope for lighting don't. And so it's just sort of a question of, can we get the labor force to support that in place to be able to help facilitate that transition? Or is HVAC going to get savvy enough and understand enough about our systems that they can start doing it themselves? So I think there is sort of that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the labor force is a big deal, right, on all sides of this. And I think that in reality, that I think there's a opportunity for somebody who wants to set up and start some companies that are, for a lack of a better term, integrators, right? Like that are savvy enough on both sides, or three sides or five sides or whatever, but they know how to do these things, and they can go in, and there's a role there that I think could be a big place for somebody to make some real headway on this.
Yeah, and this truly speaks to the exact program that Webster is working on with NEEA for the certification, trying to get more, and starting with the distributors and trying to get more people, savvy with controls from a design, from an implementation side, the whole way through, and try to get more boots on ground so that we have those bodies in place to assist. Because I'm glad that Webster and I aren't the only ones that feel this way, that it's HVAC or lighting is going to win, and HVAC looks like the front runner at the moment. So I'm glad we're not the only ones that feel like this is there for the taking if everyone can get out of their own way and work together and just go get it.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we're almost out of time here, so I want to recap this because I think this is such an interesting conversation that we've had, and one that's unique to a lot of the conversations we've had in the past, because utilities are kind of this lofty entity when it comes to projects, especially for designers. Designers rarely think about utilities or rebates or incentives or anything like that. Distributors and dealers focus a little bit more, contractors a little bit more, owners absolutely focus on that and how do they pay for the equipment. But there's a real need and requirement for utilities to save energy, and how they achieve that needs to be measurable, provable, all that, because they can't just say, oh yeah, we implemented some energy saving methods and we're good, right? So they need to show that they're saving energy over time and that they're really working hard to do that. Otherwise, they get slapped with really steep fees and fines. So there's a reason why they want this, why they want lighting controls to help move this forward, because a lot of people have already lamented, or not lamented, but stated that LEDs have won their place. You know, if you were going to get LEDs, you would have gotten them by now. And so there's no reason to keep pushing that around. And a lot of groups haven't adopted lighting controls. And so it's saying, okay, we gotta motivate this shift. But there's a real benefit to what technology we have available nowadays for that adoption to be a lot easier than it used to be. It used to be really challenging. You had to think about, low voltage wiring in a lot of cases, and how you're going to connect the system, how you're going to program the system, all of this stuff. And you still do need to think about that. But as far as needing to think about that up front versus after the fact, if you're doing a triple LC installation, for example, you have that flexibility to reprogram and reset up the system later on without having to do a huge amount of heartache and having to say, okay, we got to rip out these wires and replace that component. And so that's a real reason to do that. And additionally, if it's a wireless triple LC system, now you don't even have to coordinate wiring. There's still devices that you might have to wire, but for the most part, when it's in the fixture and it's a wireless communication node, you're just swapping fixtures out again. You're just putting the fixtures in with a node, and it can communicate to the system and have that. But additionally, leveraging that data, not just for the standard out of the box functionalities, but thinking through like more creative ways to squeeze that energy out of the system can really benefit. And so integrating with other systems like HVAC systems can really elevate the energy savings. And so it's not there yet, but we are seeing some requirements coming out saying you have to integrate with HVAC. And so I imagine that we're going to see that more and more as we go forward, because of the fact that it's not being done and it really should be done. And so that being the case, it's also pretty easy to do that now too, especially if you're looking at it through the lens of, I have all this data, I just need to find a way to send the correct information to the HVAC side. Then it's not going to be that much of a heavy lift, and especially for those smaller projects, I would say that those are actually the ones that are going to benefit the most from a triple LC installation if you're trying to do that kind of integration. So all of that is to say, we've got a lot of work ahead of us to try to ensure that this is a smooth landing when it comes to widespread adoption. But the argument is there. It exists, and there's a reason to do it from a utility standpoint. Now, there are lighting designers out there who probably will, fight tooth and nail for not having sensors embedded in their fixtures and, trying to keep the aesthetics preserved. But that's just another challenge to overcome when it comes to this kind of technology.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really important to understand is with LLC, for me, and everybody's going to be a little different, but for me, I'm not asking for a sensor in every fixture in every place of the building, right? I want a sensor in all the general lighting. I don't need a sensor in the sconces or the architectural lighting or any of that kind of stuff. And the nice thing about most of these systems, right, the LLCs and the NLCs, they're really the same system. The back end is exactly the same thing. All you're doing is how many sensors are in it. So you can have a hybrid. That's always the new new word of the world, right? Hybrid, right? System that is, all the general lighting has a sensor in every fixture, and then you can have a sensor that controls the wall sconces or the architectural lighting, or maybe some of the can lights or something, right? You can have a system that's mixed and get equal savings and get equal what we're trying to achieve with this. The goal is not to have a little sensor on every fixture throughout every space and every point of the building. The goal is to cover the building in a point where we have the data and the sensors to be able to, effectively have the most efficient lighting, and in the future, HVAC system we can possibly do.
I just wanted to hop in here as well, because this is something that is debated a lot, and there are a lot of definitions out there. But do you mind just giving us your definition of what LLLC is?
Yeah. So the way that we look at LLLC is it's a network lighting control system where where there's a sensor that does at least occupancy, daylighting, and high-end trim in every fixture that is, in a space for the general lighting of the space. The point is networked, right? So we get a lot of questions on a lot of these room-based systems where they talk to the wall switch and they have a sensor in every fixture. It's great. I'm happy. It's a step, but it's not LLC because it doesn't go outside of the space, right? It's solely looked at the room that it's in, and it's not a network lighting control system that is outside. We view it, DLC defines LLC as a subset of NLC. I'll get in trouble with DLC, but I think they should stop promoting NLC and start and make that a switch, right? And say LLC should be the one that they're the most important and most excited about, and NLC is over here on the side, right? Type of thing, which is kind of the opposite of what they're doing. But I think that that's the general thing that we look at: a network lighting control system that has the sensor embedded in it. Easiest is embedded in factory, but if Max Light system, we can do it on site. I mean, I don't have a problem with doing it on site. It's easy, whatever, it works, right? Type of thing. More often than not, it's easiest to do it embedded at the factory, right? But as long as the sensor is in all the general lighting fixtures, that's what we define as LLC.
Awesome. No, Chris, fantastic conversation. Absolutely. Our listeners are going to get a ton out of this. There's not a question about it. You touched on so many things that we've talked about in previous episodes, and it was fantastic to hear your side of it. So thank you so much. And you're right. It truly is. The wave is coming, and people are either going to ride it or get crushed by it. And that is exactly what is going to happen. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. So I will close us out and remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and also Light Fair. We will see you guys there.
It's also financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got a lot of information, but information on the NAILD certification, if you want to check it out, worth checking out, absolutely. But also huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Max Light. We could not do this without your support, and especially your CMAX platform. If anything you have heard on this episode piqued your interest, you should check out their CMAX lighting control system, which has 4 different tiers. So you don't have to do the enterprise level stuff. If you're just doing small stuff, you can still do that. And easy plug and play solution for your lighting controls platform. So check it out, maxlight.com/CMAX. But thank you so much for joining us here today. And Chris, thank you. This was such a cool conversation.